We have some surprising Cowboys moves incoming as a new report reveals a wild update talking about 3 different surprise cut candidates for the Dallas Cowboys ahead of 53-man roster cutdowns, which are now right around the corner. Welcome into Cowboys Digest, everybody. I'm Jace Andrews. We certainly appreciate you tuning into today's show. Real quickly, want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. It's 100% free, and we are on the road to 5,250. That'd be a fourth of a way to 6,000. We're about 25 subscribers off, and I know there are 25 of you watching this video right now who have not yet hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate it if you would, and of course, you're getting the best Cowboys coverage daily here on Cowboys Digest. Let's go into today's article and the backstory behind it. 3 Cowboys players who could be surprising roster cuts. Now, this all stems from Brian Schottenheimer specifically. Obviously, the 53-man roster cutdown date is coming up fast after this final preseason game against the Atlanta Falcons. And in a lot of sense of the word, the roster is already made. The speculations are being had between fans of who will make the roster and who won't, but I'm pretty positive that inside the organization, they have a very good idea of who is going to make the roster and who isn't. Now, there is a final preseason game to kind of basically maybe iron stuff out if there is a little bit of question marks, but Schottenheimer had an interesting quote about it, and it kind of opens us up for debate. We go into our first one here saying, quote, "We'll sit down and make some decisions about the entire roster. There will probably be a few surprises compared to the projections out there where people might say, I thought for sure this guy was going to make it," end quote. All right. So we got a little bit of juice right there from Coach Brian Schottenheimer, basically suggesting that there are 53-man roster projections out there. We've gone through some of them on this channel, but those projections may not be entirely right. And people who we have been saying, oh yeah, they're going to make the roster, well, seems like they may actually not have a guaranteed spot, which of course talks us more into some surprising cut candidates, and that's where we go here first in the running back room. Probably the least surprising of the 3, that is going to be Miles Sanders. Now, things look bright when the Cowboys signed Miles Sanders for him to make the roster, but he has had a lackluster training camp, hasn't really performed well, and it just seems like there are better people out there. Javonte Williams is a little bit younger, and yes, the veteran presence is nice for Miles Sanders, but do you really need that in this sense? I really don't think you do. Jaden Blue, obviously the injury is there, but they still believe highly of him, and Phil Maffa had a very good preseason thus far. Really excited to see what he can do in the final preseason game against the Falcons, which, by the way, going to have a stream for that, so make sure you join us here on Cowboys Digest for that. But let's go into the article kind of talking about why exactly Miles Sanders would be a choice of cutting for the Dallas Cowboys. Saying, quote, "Despite the Cowboys' lack of clarity at the running back position, Miles Sanders' time in Dallas looks to be short-lived. Javonte Williams is obviously the RB1 after being held out with the rest of the starters in preseason, and Jaden Blue receiving first-team reps prior to his ankle/heel is pretty good indication he'll be the primary backup," end quote. They continue on saying, quote, "That leaves Sanders on the outside looking in, competing with Phil Maffa and any other running back Dallas could potentially claim off of waivers or add after roster cuts. The hopes of his recapturing his Pro Bowl form hasn't materialized, which should make him a surprise cut in the favor of another running back with more upside," end quote. And that's really the simple point. Miles Sanders was a guy who we thought could come in here and maybe recapture the years of his late days with the Philadelphia Eagles, where he was rushing for 1,200 yards in that last season in Philadelphia. Or even going back through his entire Philadelphia tenure, 800 yards, 754 yards. Like, he was doing very well each and every season. Although that didn't work out in Carolina, the Cowboys, for a cheap contract, took the risk, knowing they had a bunch of different options at the running back position. Well, from what we've seen, training camp and all this stuff, and in the preseason, the way they've been handling Miles Sanders, it seems like he will not end up making the roster, which is a little bit of a surprise, not due to the fact that he's not going to make the roster, but just because this was a guy the Cowboys went out and signed in free agency, got him on the roster, and now they are just going to basically kind of punt on this one. And I mean, it's the right move. If you have a guy like Phil Mafah who really showed out last preseason game and looked really well, I don't think it's worth it to keep a veteran on a 1-year deal in your roster rather than, make sure you have Phil Mafah, make sure you have Jaden Blue and any other running back they might want to add. I mean, I think at this point it's pretty assumed that Deuce Vaughn's not going to make the roster as well. So a lot of interesting topics there in the running back room. It's a full room, not a obvious RB1 choice, but definitely a full room. Asim Richards is another surprising cut candidate. This one is probably my most surprising of the three. I know the third one is probably going to be the majority of people's most surprising, but to me it just kind of stinks because there was a lot of hope for him, and I think in some ways he has a little bit of that left just because of the injuries to Tyler Guyton and Robert Jones. But I still see him as an interesting slot. Let's go to blogging with the boys, though, and kind of talk about it. Asim Richards entered the season under the assumption he would be the Cowboys swing tackle for the second year in a row after showing growth as a rotational starter. Then throw in the fact that he has the positional flex to kick it side to guard, and one would think that added versatility would lock him and make him a virtual roster lock, which you'd probably be right. However, if we go more deep and go look here at the depth chart for the Dallas Cowboys on the offensive line, you know that Asim Richards is a guy who could easily pop in there and definitely be somebody who can play guard and play tackle, he can swing. It's a lot of different versatility options for him. But if you look at the starters, and Tyler Guyton, Tyler Smith, Cooper Beebe, Tyler Beebe, and Terrence Steele, obviously Guyton is currently injured, don't know exactly when he'll be back, but it's the rise of Nate Thomas that really kind of took this roster by storm and kind of in some ways kicked out Asim Richards because it was looking like he would probably jump into that left tackle position, but I think good news, bad news, because of Tyler Guyton's injury and Nate Thomas playing so well at the left tackle position since Guyton's absence, Asim Richards have been kind of kicked out of there. Now he's listed on the depth chart as a third-string backup left guard. So that's where the positionment is an interesting point of contemplation there. So when we talk about that, we also have to look at the other part of this, saying, quote, unfortunately for him, Nathaniel Thomas came out of nowhere, not only jumping him on the depth chart, but earning the trust of both his QB and the coaching staff. This would likely be strictly a numbers crunch move, where Dallas may have to go deeper at another position and shorter on the offensive line. Ideally, he'd go unclaimed, returning to the practice squad, end quote. So that's kind of the hope with Asim Richards, is that the cut is going to be made. He will probably not be on the roster when 53-man roster cutdowns come. But you want him to be available for you in the future. And so with that being said, you probably expect some way for them to add him to the practice squad. Now, before we get to the final guy and probably the most surprising cut of them all, I got to ask you, is there somebody I've missed? Is there somebody that you agree with? Who is your surprising cut candidate ahead of 53-man roster cutdowns? Let me know down in the comment section if you've got a guy that you're thinking, oh yeah, this guy, everybody's saying he's going to be on the roster, but in my opinion, he's not going to be. Let me know down in the comments. Okay, the last one. It's an interesting one for sure, but Mazi Smith, a former first rounder out of Michigan. He's been a bust. I mean, there's not really a light way to put this. He has not been good, and it might be time for the Cowboys to just say sayonara because, yes, the defensive tackle is an interesting position for a couple of different reasons, but in all reality, what has Mazi Smith done to deserve a position on the roster in some ways? And obviously, this is a surprising one, so for that reason, I'm going to let Blogging with the Boys say his point first before I get to my point. Quote, Mazi Smith looks to be heading down the same path as Taco Charlton, a former Michigan player and a first-round draft bust. Despite being listed as a starter on Dallas's depth chart, and unlike Osa Odigizua and Solomon Thomas, Smith has played quite a bit in both preseason games already. This is true. Smith has played a lot in preseason games, and that is usually a sign that your roster spot is, I'm not going to say a question mark, but definitely you're not the starter if you're playing in preseason games snap in, snap out, because especially with Odigizua not exactly playing as much as Mazi, and somewhat same can be said for Solomon Thomas, you believe those are probably your starters. And in that case scenario, where does Mazi Smith rank on this depth chart at all? Does he fit into the team in some way? Well, It's really a product of the way the Cowboys have handled Mazi Smith in some aspects, and in some ways the way that Mazi Smith has been handling these changes. Quote, sadly, the same issues that have plagued him in the first 2 seasons with the Cowboys continue to do so in year 3. Despite his natural strength and power, he's still struggling to anchor down against the run and hasn't shown much pass rushing upside either. Even with defensive tackle being the weak link on the Cowboys roster, Smith could still be a surprise cut, end quote. Now, the only reason I wanted to throw this guy in there is specifically because of the quote that we got from Brian Schottenheimer, because this is not a guy that was drafted in his regime. He is an offensive guy, and yes, he was there, but this is not his draft pick. And the last sentence, people might say, I thought for sure this guy was going to make it, and then he doesn't. Of the people on the roster who we have been saying time and time again, not even giving a thought, oh yeah, he's going to make the roster. I mean, there was talk of Asim Richards, there was talk of Miles Sanders, there's talk of some guys who are like, oh yeah, they're definitely question marks. But if we're going based off the fact of the quote from Brian Schottenheimer saying, there are guys that you thought were going to make it that are not, that fits the exact definition of Mazi Smith, because I haven't seen really any publication until now, and it's an interesting thought, because yes, he's a first-round pick, but he's going into his 3rd year. Nothing has changed, nothing has happened, and the struggles are still there. If there is better out there, if there is people they believe have a better upside, they're going to give that spot to them. Now, the question for the Cowboys is there somebody out there with the better upside? That's really the ultimate question mark, and really kind of depends, or has the future of Mazi Smith with the Cowboys kind of hanging in the balance in that aspect. So it's an interesting one for sure. But we'll have the 53-man roster cut downs next week. Make sure you subscribe today. Tune in for that show. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the 53-man roster and breaking down every single one of them. But for now, we do appreciate you coming out and joining us here on Cowboys Digest. As always, we'll see you next time. Peace out, guys.